There's a moment near the end of a concert in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in May of 2025, where a man in a white cowboy hat stands at a microphone in front of a sold-out crowd and says four words that country music fans never wanted to hear. "This is the last one." And he meant it. Not the way some artists say it, only to announce a comeback 6 months later, but genuinely, completely meant it, because Alan Jackson wasn't walking away from the road because he was tired of the spotlight. He was walking away because his body was forcing him to. And the story of how he got to that moment in Milwaukee, the disease he hid for a decade, the marriage that nearly collapsed at its peak, the family tragedy that broke him open, that's a story most people never heard. This is what really happened to Alan Jackson. He grew up in Noonan, Georgia, the son of a Ford dealership worker named Daddy Jean and a mother the family called Mama Ruth. There was nothing glamorous about it. The house was small, money was tight, and the music that filled the rooms was gospel, not country. Alan didn't discover traditional country until a friend introduced him to Gene Watson, John Anderson, and Hank Williams Jr. And when he did, something clicked that never unclicked. He didn't go to music school, he didn't have connections. After high school, he worked construction jobs, drove forklifts, and played small clubs across Georgia for crowds that barely noticed him. What he did have was a girl, his high school sweetheart, Denise, who he married on December 15, 1979, when he was 21 and she was still a teenager. They didn't know it yet, but she was about to become the most important decision he ever made. For 6 years after the wedding, Alan Jackson stayed in Georgia, playing wherever anyone would book him, writing songs that nobody was buying, and slowly making peace with the idea that this dream might never happen. Then he and Denise made a decision that changed everything. They packed up and moved to Nashville. Alan got a job in the mailroom at the Nashville Network, sitting in the audience during tapings of singing competitions, watching other artists do what he wanted to do, and waiting for a door to open. The door didn't open, but Denise did something about it. Working as a flight attendant, she spotted Glenn Campbell on a plane. She walked up to him and explained that her husband was a singer-songwriter trying to make it in Nashville. Campbell could have brushed her off. Instead, he handed her the business card for his management company and told her to have Alan call. That one conversation led to Jackson's first publishing deal, which led to his first contacts inside Nashville's inner circle, which led to him becoming the very first artist ever signed to the newly formed Arista Nashville label in 1989. One flight, one conversation, one card. That's how close he came to never happening at all. His debut single didn't crack the top 40. Nobody panicked. Within months, Here in the Real World climbed to number 3, and the album that followed announced something that Nashville had quietly been missing. A man who sounded like he actually belonged in a honky-tonk. Country music in the late 1980s had drifted far from its roots. Pop production, crossover chasing, hair that defied gravity. Alan Jackson walked into that environment wearing a cowboy hat and playing it straight. Critics would later say he single-handedly kept traditional country music alive during that era. He wasn't trying to save a genre, he was just being himself. 35 #1 singles followed. 75 million records sold worldwide. 2 Grammy Awards, 16 CMA Awards, 17 ACM Awards. Chattahoochee became one of the most recognizable songs in the genre's history. Then, on September 11, 2001, he sat down and wrote Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning? A song so honest, so human, and so perfectly timed that it became one of the most significant country recordings ever made. Not bad for a forklift driver from Noonan, Georgia. But at home, behind all of it, the picture was a lot more complicated. Fame changes people. Or more accurately, it changes the space between people. Alan Jackson was spending months on the road every year, playing to massive crowds, becoming a household name, while Denise stayed home raising their daughters. Maddie, born in 1990, Allie, born in 1993, and Danny, born in August of 1997. 3 little girls, one husband who was always somewhere else. After Christmas of 1997, Alan and Denise separated. He had been unfaithful. He left. And for 4 months, one of country music's most beloved couples quietly fell apart behind closed doors, while the hits kept playing on the radio and nobody knew a thing. Denise has spoken about it since, including in her 2007 book, It's All About Him, where she laid out exactly what happened. The betrayal, the silence, the 4 months of wondering if the marriage was over. The greatest blessings in my life have come out of my worst shattering, she later said. His betrayal and our separation were what led to us being able to have the kind of marriage that we both always wanted but just didn't know how to have. Alan came back, they went to counseling, they renewed their vows. And in the years that followed, they built something stronger than what they'd had before, a marriage that had actually been tested and survived. The song Remember When, released in 2003, quietly reflects that entire journey, from young love in Georgia to everything they nearly lost and chose to keep. In 2010, Denise was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. She underwent 2 months of radiation and chemotherapy. It was a frightening stretch for the whole family, and it ended with her being declared cancer-free. But it was a warning. These were people who were not immune to what life could throw at them. And then 8 years later, the unthinkable happened. Alan's oldest daughter, Maddie, had married a man named Ben Selectman in October of 2017, a Nashville assistant district attorney described by everyone who knew him as a godly, generous, relentlessly good man. They had been married for less than a year when the family gathered in Florida over Labor Day weekend in September of 2018. It was supposed to be a celebration. It turned into a nightmare. Ben slipped on a wet dock while helping a woman onto the boat. He fell and hit his head. At first, it didn't seem catastrophic. He was conscious, disoriented, but awake. Then the brain began to swell. He was rushed to the ICU, placed in a medically induced coma, and underwent multiple surgeries over 12 days. When doctors finally began the process of waking him up, a blood clot broke loose. He suffered multiple strokes. Within 24 hours, his heart began to fail. Ben Seligman died on September 12, 2018. He was 28 years old. Alan Jackson, who had always written from real life, shelved an entire album he had been working on. He couldn't finish it, not then. It was eventually released years later as Where Have You Gone? And buried inside it were songs written for his daughter's weddings, songs written for his late mother, and the grief of a father who had watched his family absorb something no family should ever have to absorb. All of that, the career, the marriage crisis, Denise's cancer, Ben's death, and the most significant thing happening to Alan Jackson was the one nobody could see. Because somewhere around 2011, a doctor gave him a diagnosis he didn't share with the public for a decade: Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, CMT, a hereditary neurological condition that damages the peripheral nerves connecting the spine and brain to the arms and legs, causing progressive muscle weakness, balance problems, and a gradual loss of physical control. There is no cure. He inherited it directly from his father. His grandmother had it, one of his sisters had it. It ran through the family like a quiet current, and now it was running through him. For 10 years, Alan Jackson performed with it, toured with it, accepted awards, and played to sold-out arenas and smiled for cameras, all while quietly losing his footing on stage and hoping nobody noticed. By 2021, it was getting harder to hide. It's getting more and more obvious, he told the Today Show when he finally went public. I know I'm stumbling around on stage. I'm having a little trouble balancing, even in front of the microphone. I just feel very uncomfortable. The response from fans was overwhelming. Not pity, gratitude. Gratitude that he'd told them the truth. Gratitude that he'd kept showing up all those years. And something else, a shared awareness that whatever time was left on that stage was borrowed time. He launched The Last Call, one more for the Road Farewell Tour, in 2022. Health setbacks forced early cancellations. He came back in 2024, extending the tour through 10 cities, and made sure every dollar counted, donating a portion of each ticket sale to the CMT Research Foundation, with donations being matched by a group of generous contributors. By the time it was over, the tour had raised more than $2.25 million for CMT research. His final roadshow was played on May 17, 2025, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He told the crowd exactly what it was. "This is the last one out on the road for me," he said, standing under the lights one last time. "I'm so blessed. Thank you all so much for supporting my music. I'm living the American dream for sure." One more show remains, a grand finale on June 27, 2026, at Nissan Stadium in Nashville, Tennessee, sold out. Luke Combs, Carrie Underwood, Miranda Lambert, Eric Church, Keith Urban, and a dozen others are coming to send him off properly, in the city where it all started. Alan Jackson is 67 years old. He still scribbles melodies on napkins. He still hears songs in his head that haven't been written yet. His daughters are all grown. He has grandsons who carry pieces of his name. And as of Christmas 2025, all 3 of his daughters announced they were pregnant at the same time. 3 new lives on the way just as one chapter closes. The disease will take the stage from him. It will not take what he built on it. 35 number ones, 75 million records. A marriage that broke and was put back together and lasted over 4 decades. A family that buried a son-in-law at 28 and kept going. A man who hid a degenerative illness for 10 years because he wasn't ready to stop. You can argue about who the greatest country artist of all time is. That debate will never end, but you cannot argue about this. Alan Jackson played it straight his entire career. The music, the image, the acknowledgement of his flaws, the willingness to stand in front of a sold-out crowd in Milwaukee and tell them the truth. That was always the whole point.